If your son had fired that BB gun 1 inch lower, my 3-month-old daughter wouldn't be breathing right now.
That's what I told her. Marilee Draston, president of the Silverbriar Hollow HOA, as she stood in front of the sundial grove with her arms folded like the mother of the year. Karen Draston, her 14-year-old, still gripped the BB rifle like a toy he wasn't done playing with. The stroller sat behind me, canopy torn through the center, the jagged edge curling toward where Linnea's heart had been. Marilee glanced at the hole like it was a parking violation. "Bram, it's a plastic pellet. Don't turn this into a spectacle." She said that to me, with my baby still trembling in my arms. "Do you know what kind of force it takes for a BB to punch through ballistic-grade nylon?" I asked, voice low. "That pellet spun. It left a rotational pattern. That means your son didn't fire by accident. He aimed." And that's when her expression faltered, just for a beat. Like a record scratch in the middle of her smug little HOA script. They called me dangerous. They said I made the neighborhood feel on edge. I was the one who caught the projectile before it split my daughter's ribcage. If you're watching this because someone in your neighborhood thinks their title makes them untouchable, subscribe now. Because you need to know exactly how I turned that smug president into a community liability. I'm Bram Callister, Chief Firearms Instructor for Washoe County. I don't just train adults how to hold a weapon, I train teenagers not to kill each other by mistake. I teach risk evaluation, projectile physics, and incident de-escalation. I've stood in courtrooms to testify on angle of entry. I've reconstructed crime scenes from shredded drywall and dented fencing. And I buried my wife 4 weeks before Linnea was born. Mira died of an aneurysm in her sleep, 2 months before her due date. Linnea came early, lungs underdeveloped, immune system weak. She survived the NICU, the tubes, the alarms, and I swore if she made it out of that hospital, she'd never fight for air again. That stroller was the one place I could breathe too. Every morning, I wheeled her out to the Sundial Grove, an HOA-approved relaxation zone, freshly landscaped, regulated for silence. It's where I read her Mira's old letters, where I told her about the world that waited for her. That morning, I was reading The Things We Carry when the pellet snapped through the canopy. It didn't whistle, it didn't crack, it snapped, like a dry twig hitting bone. My body moved before thought. I pulled Linnea to my chest and scanned for the shooter. Kieran stood 20 feet back, one eye still squinting behind the BB gun's sight rail. He didn't flinch, just lowered it slowly, like it was some kind of game. "Are you serious?" I shouted. That's when Marilee came marching across the mulch path like she'd been waiting for her cue. "Mr. Callister, this isn't the time for intimidation. My son is a child." "No," I snapped. "He's a minor, with a weapon. It's a BB gun, not a weapon. I've testified in court on BB injuries more lethal than handguns. Would you like the photos?" She didn't answer. She did what HOA leaders do, deflected. "We'll review it internally. But unless there's property damage, this isn't an actionable concern under Section 8. You don't need Section 8. You need a trauma center if that pellet hit her face." Her eyes flicked to the stroller. The tear in the canopy still fluttered slightly in the breeze. I scooped the pellet from the stroller base. It was warm. That's when I realized something. She wasn't just covering for her son. She was calculating the liability. And I was calculating something else. The financial risk report I was about to file with the HOA's insurer. Marilee didn't know it yet, but this wasn't just about a pellet, it was about negligence. Patterned, protect my own, cover up the truth negligence. It was about what happens when your HOA president lets her son weaponize the illusion of safety. And it was about what someone like me can do when insurance tables turn. Kieran didn't even say sorry. He stood behind his mother, shoulders back like a soldier at parade rest, jaw clenched in forced defiance. No fear, no remorse, just that blank teenage stare that dares you to flinch first. His thumb rested near the safety switch, like he might fire again if he thought no one would stop him. And no one would have. Not in Silverbriar Hollow, because this wasn't the first time something like this happened. Just the first time it hit a baby. The previous week, a neighbor's cat turned up limping. No vet report, no confrontation. Just whispers on the HOA message board about animal control issues. 2 weeks before that, someone's garden window cracked from what was blamed on wind-blown debris. Always just shy of proof. Always just enough doubt for Marilee to skate. I knew the pattern. I've seen it on training grounds, in county briefings, in testimony rooms, minor acts, minor tools, minor consequences until they're not. And in Silverbriar Hollow, Marilee Draston was the final word. She ran the HOA like a CEO without a board. Her word wasn't policy. It was gospel. She wasn't elected by majority. She took over when the previous president stepped down due to health reasons. No one challenged her. They feared the letters more than the fines. My first interaction with her came 3 weeks after I moved in. I'd parked my state-issued firearms training van along the curb while unloading instructional gear, airsoft markers, safety dummies, legal pamphlets. Within an hour, I had a violation taped to my door: unsecured military presence, visual disruption. That's how she saw it. A father unloading sealed, locked, rubberized safety containers was a threat. Her son with a BB rifle was a child expressing curiosity. I didn't fight it then. Mira had just died. Linnea had just come home. I didn't have the energy to argue about appearances. I paid the fine. But now I saw it clearly. That day at the sundial, the moment I saw that smug flicker in her eyes when I cradled my baby like a target, I understood what this neighborhood really was. It wasn't safe. It was sanitized, on the surface. And everything Marilee did was about control, not care. I left the grove with Linnea still pressed against my chest. Her heartbeat was steady, her breathing even, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking, not from fear, from restraint. We walked past 3 neighbors on the way home. None of them met my eyes. They'd heard the shot, seen the stroller, watched the confrontation, and still, they said nothing. Back in my house, I pulled up the HOA portal and filed a formal safety complaint. I documented the incident, uploaded photos of the torn canopy, the pellet, Linnea's vitals from the baby monitor. I cited state statutes regarding projectile devices in residential zones, particularly when operated by unsupervised minors. Then I waited. No call came, no email, no knock. Instead, the next morning, I found a pink citation envelope stuck under my windshield wiper. Excessive accusatory behavior creates community distress. Community distress. Apparently, defending your daughter's life now constituted emotional terrorism in Silverbriar Hollow. I called the sheriff's office and reported the incident. Sergeant Vellon was polite, sympathetic even, but when I asked about criminal charges, he sighed. No camera footage, no witness statements, no visible injury. I can file it under logged incident, but without more, there's not much to pursue. I asked about the HOA overriding camera data. HOA cameras aren't subject to municipal retention standards, he said. They can overwrite footage in 24 hours unless subpoenaed earlier. Marilee had waited 26. I hung up and sat in Linnea's nursery, rocking her gently while the sun painted stripes across the wall. I counted every breath, every twitch, every memory Mira would never get to see. And that's when I decided I wasn't going to let this die in silence. They wanted to hide it behind bylaws and buffer zones. I was going to drag it into the light using something they couldn't ignore: money, because even if Marilee didn't care about safety, she cared about liability, and I had the training, the certification, and the credentials to make sure the entire community saw the threat her silence created, starting with their premiums. The next time I saw Halton Breck, he was standing beneath the pavilion outside the community center, tugging at the collar of his shirt like it was suffocating him. He didn't wave. He never did. Halton wasn't the type to show much emotion, but today, his discomfort clung to him like humidity. The HOA meeting was scheduled for 7. He always showed up by 6:45, never spoke unless asked, and never made eye contact longer than a second. But today, he kept glancing at me like he wanted to say something and couldn't. I was there early, too. Linnea was strapped into her carrier on my chest, asleep, her tiny hand curled into my shirt. I wasn't there to speak, not yet. I just wanted to see who else showed up, who would look Marilee in the face and pretend last week didn't happen. Inside the community center, the chairs were already arranged in their perfect 3x6 grid. HOA banners ironed flat. Agenda sheets stacked neatly. Coffee urn bubbling in the corner. A reminder that appearances still mattered more than consequences. Marilee entered at 6:59 on the dot, flanked by Karen, who dragged a chair to the back and slumped down with crossed arms. She smiled, greeted the others by name. None of them mentioned the BB gun. Not once. When she caught sight of me, her smile tightened. I took a seat in the back corner. And Halton? He didn't sit with the board. He lingered near the refreshments table, pouring a cup of decaf he didn't drink. That was the first sign. The meeting began with usual procedural nonsense. Trash bin rotation, fence paint violations, a brief update on upcoming landscaping vendor bids, not a single word about the safety complaint I'd filed, not a reference to the projectile, or to Linnea, or to anything that would suggest last week even existed. I raised my hand. Merrily looked directly at it, then moved to the next agenda item. That was the second sign. 10 minutes later, Halton shifted in the back. His eyes moved to me, then to Merrily, then back again. I recognized the pattern. It wasn't hesitation. It was guilt, controlled, measured, practiced. He knew something. Maybe it was the footage. Maybe it was an old complaint. But the way his fingers drummed against the side of his coffee cup, rhythmic, mechanical, as if calculating risk, told me he'd been sitting on something long before the pellet snapped through Linnea's canopy. I stayed after the meeting ended. Most people filed out quickly. HOA members always seem to have other places to be after pretending their power isn't personal. Halton lingered. When the last neighbor left, I approached the refreshments table. He didn't move. "You saw the footage," I said quietly. He didn't respond. "I know Merrily delayed the report until the overwrite window passed. You do too." Still nothing. But his knuckles had gone pale against the paper cup. "I'm not here to make a scene, Halton, but if this goes to court or if a liability review hits the board, you're on the list. As treasurer, as a voting member." He blinked slowly. "There's more than one incident." That stopped me. "What?" He glanced around, then stared at the floor. The BB gun wasn't the first thing. There were others. Pet injuries, broken glass, a kid hit with a slingshot last summer. They were all dismissed. By who? He didn't have to answer. The implication sat between us like a weight. "I wanted to say something," he whispered, "but Merrily always said we couldn't risk the board looking fractured, that if we had infighting, the whole neighborhood would suffer. And now?" He looked at Linnea, then he looked away. "You'll have what you need, just don't ask me for it yet." I nodded once and stepped back. I didn't push him, not yet, because I knew the conflicted ones are the ones who carry the truth longest, and they're the ones who crack the hardest when the pressure's right. 2 days later, I got a letter, hand-delivered, no envelope, just a folded slip of HOA stationery, with my name written in hard, deliberate ink. No stamp, no signature. It was a final courtesy warning. Due to repeated disruptions and submission of non-actionable grievances, your presence at future HOA gatherings may be subject to review. They didn't say banned. They said subject to review. The kind of vague bureaucratic threat designed to put you on edge without giving you something solid enough to challenge. Merrily was getting nervous, and when people like her get nervous, they don't retreat. They escalate. That same evening, I noticed a tall orange flag planted on the strip of lawn between my sidewalk and the curb. Utility marker. Red paint sprayed around the irrigation head I'd replaced last month with HOA-approved parts. I'd even paid a licensed installer. Still, the flag stood there like a warning shot. Then came the email, a violation notice for unauthorized fixture adjustment to common space irrigation. $275 fine pending. The photos attached were grainy. My property, my tools, from behind my own fence line. I filed a counter notice, uploaded the invoice, installer's license, time-stamped images, and HOA pre-approval from 6 weeks prior. No response. The next morning, Linnea and I went to the community mailbox cluster. Half the neighbors pretended not to see me. One couple crossed the street entirely. I could feel it in the air. Merrily's campaign had already started. I wasn't just being ignored, I was being painted. As paranoid, as dangerous, as unfit. And the one thing she hadn't yet counted on was how good I was at counteroffensives. I spent the next several hours at my workstation. I wasn't digging through files or scheming some courtroom stunt. I was running liability math. See, what Merrily didn't know, what most HOAs don't know, is that state-certified firearms instructors have continuing education requirements in multiple legal domains: premises liability, juvenile weapon discharge scenarios, and incident report drafting. I wasn't just trained to teach, I was trained to evaluate aftermath. And this wasn't just about Linnea anymore. It was about a known risk: a board member's child with access to projectile weapons, multiple dismissed safety complaints, and no incident intervention plan on record. I opened a new report and titled it plainly: Community Risk Assessment, Silver Briar Hollow. I laid it out clean: no emotion, no accusation, just data. Safety incident frequency, suppressed complaints. Community risk multipliers from minor to major weapon misfires, BB guns, slingshots, glass projectiles. Statistical injuries to minors, legal precedents from Nevada HOA cases. I wrote it as a certified instructor, not a father. I stripped my name from the intro, let the facts do the speaking, and then I filed it. Not to the HOA, to the insurance carrier listed on the community's original purchase documents, the one Marilee never thought anyone would look at, because, to her, insurance was something that happened in the background. I knew better. If there's one thing insurance companies hate more than lawsuits, it's patterns. And Silver Briar Hollow was developing one. By nightfall, I'd received a digital read receipt from the underwriting department. 12 hours later, I got a reply. They requested confirmation of the board's failure to report a child injury incident. I confirmed, yes, a baby was nearly struck by a BB pellet fired by a board member's dependent, with no disciplinary action or reporting. They said they would begin internal review. And that was the fuse. Because when an HOA fails to mitigate a recurring safety risk, especially one involving minors, the insurance company doesn't just call the board. They call everyone, every policyholder, every resident, and they warn them. Premiums are going up unless the board gets its house in order. Marilee had fired a shot by proxy. She just didn't know I'd spent my career teaching people how to trace it back to the source. It didn't take long. By Tuesday afternoon, the first neighbor knocked on my door. Her name was Delia Norwick, lived 3 units down. Realtor, late 40s, never spoke more than a wave in passing. That day she held her phone out before she said a word. I saw the email before I saw her eyes. Subject: Potential Premium Reassessment. Community Risk Alert. Silver Briar Hollow. HOA. She didn't look angry, she looked scared. I just renewed, she said, barely above a whisper. They're saying it could go up 25%, retroactively. Is this real? I nodded once. She stared at me. Is it because of Kieran? She hadn't said his name out loud before. Most people hadn't. But now that the warning came with a $sign, the silence was cracking. It's because of how the board handled it, I said. She swallowed hard. Marilee said your complaint was thrown out, that there was no evidence. She also said there was no footage. Delia looked away. Behind her, 2 more neighbors emerged from their driveways, both holding their phones. The quiet was unraveling. Inside, I paced near the window with Linnea, nestled in her bassinet beside me. The insurance company hadn't threatened lawsuits. Not yet. But their language was clear. Failure to disclose and mitigate a known pattern of safety negligence could trigger a blanket reevaluation of Silver Briar Hollow's entire liability tier. That meant higher premiums, fewer covered incidents, and potential coverage denial for future claims. By dinner, I'd received 4 more knocks, none of them hostile, all confused, all betrayed. One neighbor, Mr. Vardis, who served on the board 2 years ago, told me, "We asked her to file that first pet incident with the insurer. She said it was handled, said it didn't reach threshold." How many incidents were there? 4 at least, maybe more. She kept it quiet. I thanked him. He shook his head like a man who just realized his name might be attached to something rotten. That night, I checked the HOA member directory. No new notices, no announcements, just silence. But by morning, the silence was broken. Someone taped a letter to my door, not printed, handwritten, precise. "You're not helping anyone. You're bringing our values down. Your daughter isn't the only child who lives here." No signature. I didn't show it to the sheriff. I didn't post it. I just added it to my file. Because there's a difference between threats and evidence. And I was collecting the latter. By midday, I saw Halton again. He wasn't in the pavilion this time. He was walking toward my driveway, tie loose. A man who looked like he hadn't slept. He didn't wait for an invitation. "I've got it," he said. "Got what?" He held out a flash drive. Board emails, internal messages, the original complaint files from the other parents. She deleted the public records but didn't wipe the archive. "I have everything, time-stamped." I took it. "Why now?" "Because the neighbors are knocking on my door. Because I have grandkids, and I don't want them visiting a place where a kid with a rifle gets defended with a shrug." I looked him in the eye. "You sure you want to be the one who turns this over?" Halton nodded. "Marilee thinks we're all afraid of her. But she's afraid of something bigger. Money, exposure. You lit the match. Let me hand you the kerosene." He left without another word. I plugged the drive in that evening. Emails from parents reporting Karen throwing stones at moving bikes. A girl who needed stitches after accidentally falling near the Draston yard. Notes from board meetings where Marilee personally struck complaints from the record. A message Halton sent 2 months ago, urging a formal conversation about youth behavioral risk. Ignored. There was no accident. There was no misunderstanding. This wasn't about a single BB gun pellet. It was a cover-up. And now I had the paper trail. The first thing I did was make 3 encrypted backups of the flash drive, cloud, external, and printout. Not because I was paranoid, because I'd worked enough training cases to know that when power feels cornered, it turns desperate. By Friday morning, the emails had made their way to the insurer. I didn't send them directly. Halton did. From his personal account, time-stamped with a short but clear statement, "I can no longer ethically remain silent." That changed everything. The insurance response was swift, too swift for comfort. A formal audit was initiated. Residents began receiving notifications about upcoming interviews, with policy reviews to follow. I watched from my porch as neighbors pulled out folders, sat down with agents at their dining room tables, and finally started asking the right questions. But Marilee hadn't moved. No announcement, no apology, no acknowledgement. She was digging in. That night, Linnea couldn't sleep. She was fussy, like she could sense something rising in the air. I held her close, walking slow circles around the living room as the sound of wind carried across the neighborhood like a warning. Then, the motion light on my porch flicked on. I stepped to the window and pulled the curtain just enough to see. Marilee was standing on my lawn. No clipboard, no phone, just her and that trademark posture, arms folded like a judge, eyes scanning like searchlights. She didn't ring the bell. She didn't knock. She just stood there, watching my door like it owed her something. I didn't give her the satisfaction. Instead, I turned and walked deeper into the house, not bothering to hide my shadow behind the curtain. I wanted her to know I saw her, that I wasn't afraid. The next morning, a new violation notice showed up in my email. Security lighting causing light pollution, potential disturbance to community sleep cycles. That's when it hit me. She wasn't just retaliating. She was trying to build a case. She knew the audit was real now, that the community was waking up. So she needed a paper trail, something she could present as ongoing behavioral disruption, to justify removing me before her own credibility collapsed. So, I documented everything, every letter, every violation, every minute Linnea cried after a knock at the door, every strange car that idled across the street too long. I cataloged timestamps, archived communications, filed complaints of my own, because if she wanted a trail, I'd give her one, just not the one she thought she'd control. I wasn't just fighting back. I was laying bricks, pattern, motive, retaliation. It wasn't hard to build when the evidence kept delivering itself to my doorstep. That afternoon, I took Linnea back to the Sundial Grove. It was quiet, mostly empty. A couple kids on bikes rode past without stopping. One mom pushed a stroller with her head down. Nobody greeted me, but nobody turned away either. I sat on the bench, the same one where the pellet had pierced through the canopy. I'd replaced it, but the old one still sat in the garage. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. Not yet. Linnea slept soundly in the new stroller, wrapped in Mira's blanket. I stared at the trees and listened. This place was supposed to be healing. It was supposed to be quiet. Instead, it had become a theater for silence, weaponized by power. But something was shifting. The audit made it real. Halton's drive gave it weight. My presence, visible, unwavering, made it loud enough to hear. And now it was only a matter of time before everything she buried clawed its way into daylight. Because the difference between a pellet and a lawsuit is simple: trajectory. And hers was headed straight for impact. Halton didn't speak during the next HOA board meeting. He didn't have to. He sat at the far end of the table, arms crossed, the blue folder with the flash drive copy resting in front of him like a loaded weapon. His nameplate was slightly askew, as if someone had bumped it and he hadn't bothered to fix it. He didn't meet Marilee's eyes, not once. The room was fuller than usual. Almost 30 residents packed shoulder to shoulder into the folding chairs, far more than the typical 6 or 7. They weren't there for landscape updates. They were here for blood. Marilee opened the meeting like nothing had changed. She smiled, complimented the newly trimmed hedges near the west gate, and launched into a reminder about spring paint compliance. The script hadn't changed, but the room had. People didn't just listen. They glared. When she finally reached the community concerns portion, 2 hands shot up before she even finished the sentence. Why are we just now hearing from the insurance company that our rates are going up? Is it true that the board suppressed reports about safety incidents involving your son? Were you planning on telling us, or were you hoping no one would notice? The questions came fast, some polite, most not. A few didn't even bother with questions, just angry declarations of betrayal. Marilee didn't falter. She smiled thinly, hands folded on the table like a news anchor. These accusations are being investigated internally. I urge everyone not to jump to conclusions based on documents taken out of context or information spread without verification. Then she looked straight at Halton. He didn't blink. He just reached into his folder, pulled out a sheet, and laid it in front of her. "You signed this suppression order yourself," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Her hand froze. "It's an email from last July," he continued, "where you instructed the board secretary to omit a projectile incident involving Karen from the public meeting minutes. You cited reputational risk and unnecessary escalation." Marilee's face drained of color. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I never—" "You did," he said, cutting her off. "I was there, and I stayed silent. That's on me. But it ends now." The room fell into a dense electric silence. Then someone stood up from the third row. Delia, the realtor. She held up her phone with the HOA documents open. "There are 6 separate redacted incidents, all involving youth aggression, all dismissed with no action required." Another voice behind her. "My son got stitches after someone launched a stone from behind the Draston fence. I filed a complaint, never heard back." Another. "My car windshield was cracked last October. The HOA said it was debris. Now I'm not so sure." It was crumbling in real time. Marilee tried to regain control, voice rising in volume. "This is not a trial. This is a governance meeting. If you have concerns, submit them through the proper—" "You're the reason we have concerns," someone shouted. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. Halton had done what no one else could, not just because he had the files, but because he had finally decided he was done protecting someone who thought power meant immunity. After the meeting, I caught up with him outside. He was standing near the bike rack, arms loose at his sides, like the tension had finally bled out of him. "You sure you're ready for what comes next?" I asked. "I wasn't ready for what came before," he said, "but it still happened." I nodded. "You did the right thing." "I did it late." "Late's still better than buried." He smiled faintly. "You know they'll try to claw this back. Play the sympathy card, paint me as senile or manipulated. They can try, but the insurance company isn't interested in spin." He exhaled slowly. "Then I guess it's time we let them finish what we started." And with that, Halton Breck, HOA treasurer, conflicted ally, now whistleblower, walked into the night with his head finally level. By Monday morning, the HOA message board had turned into a war zone. Not officially, of course. Marilee had locked commenting privileges on the main threads and archived any posts related to the insurance audit. But that didn't stop the screenshots, the forwarded emails, the side-channel newsletters being passed between neighbors, like samizdat in a collapsing regime. Someone even started a newsletter titled The Hollow Truth. It spread fast, and inside each issue was a breakdown of every buried complaint, every redacted record from Halton's archive, every quote Marilee had denied saying, and proof that she had. I wasn't behind it. but I knew who was. Delia knocked on my door that afternoon, holding a manila envelope and looking more like a journalist than a realtor. "I'm compiling everything," she said without preamble, cross-referencing timestamps, incident locations, even lawn camera footage some of the other neighbors sent me. If they think they're going to bury this with semantics, they're wrong. I opened the door wider. "Come in." She stepped inside, set the folder on the dining table, and unzipped a padded case from her shoulder. Inside were at least 20 pages of color-coded reports, incident grids, name redactions, heat maps of reported disturbances centered around one address, Marilee Draston's. "I'm putting together a package for the underwriters," she said. "Not just what happened, but what could have happened. If Linnea had been hit, if that girl had been blinded by the slingshot, if a car swerved after a pellet cracked their window." "You're building a liability forecast," I said. She nodded. "I work with insurers when homes go on the market. I know how they assess risk, but they've never had this much raw data handed to them on a silver platter." "Why are you doing this?" I asked. "You're not on the board. You've never been involved before." Delia's face darkened. "My nephew was shot in the neck with a BB gun when he was 9. Lost partial vision in one eye. They said it was an accident, that the other kid didn't know better. No one ever paid for it." I nodded. That was all the answer I needed. Together, we scanned the files, comparing data from Halton's Drive with the new submissions Delia had gathered. One neighbor even included a typed statement from last year, never officially acknowledged, reporting that Karen had been seen chasing toddlers near the park with a slingshot. It had been handled internally. I recognized the language. It was Marilee's signature tactic. Delia leaned over the table. "I've built a complete risk dossier. When it's finished, I'll send it to every single insurer listed on policies in this community. Every resident, every mortgage lender that backs a property in Hollow." I watched Linnea sleeping in her bassinet by the window. "Good," I said. But something was still missing. We had the data. We had the whistleblower. We had the community finally seeing the truth. Now we needed the weapon Marilee feared most. Public exposure, not digital, not viral, not behind passwords. I opened my laptop and began drafting a presentation, not for the board, not for the insurer, for the residents, for the people who had been manipulated into thinking compliance meant safety. I pulled footage from my own cameras, the stroller, the impact point. I added overlays with trajectory angles, calculated force, and what the pellet would have done if Linnea had been positioned 2 inches lower. I didn't show her face. I didn't need to. The hole in the canopy said enough. I added excerpts from the redacted reports, quotes from the residents, silent timestamps from ignored calls, the deletion logs Halton had uncovered, all built into a timeline that ended not with accusation, but with this line: "It only takes one more oversight to become a tragedy." The truth wasn't just in the data. It was in the silence that followed every cover-up, and we were about to break it, loudly, clearly, and with receipts. I booked the clubhouse before she could. That was the first victory. Technically, any resident could reserve the space with 48 hours notice and a refundable deposit. I submitted the form at exactly 7:01 a.m. on Thursday, 1 minute after the HOA office opened. By the time Marilee's assistant tried to block it, the confirmation had already been auto-approved. The event was scheduled for Saturday afternoon. I listed it plainly: Community Safety Forum, Incident Review, and Insurance Status Briefing. I didn't dress it up, didn't use loaded language. I didn't need to. The weight of what we'd uncovered was already whispering through every hedge-lined street in Silverbriar Hollow. I printed flyers, handed them to residents one by one. Delia helped distribute them. Halton handed out a few himself, quietly, with that same exhausted but steady look in his eyes. And none of us were met with resistance anymore, only tight nods and murmured thank yous. The day before the forum, I received another violation notice. This one accused me of unauthorized use of HOA property for personal grievance display. It cited bylaws about non-sanctioned events and alleged potential reputational harm to the community. It was unsigned. I printed it out and added it to the slideshow. Saturday came. The sun stayed hidden behind a thick gray sky, casting a dull chill over the neighborhood. I arrived early, with Linnea bundled in her carrier and the presentation loaded on my laptop. Delia had already arranged chairs. Halton brought a projector. By 3:15 p.m., the room was full. Not packed shoulder to shoulder, but full in a way that mattered. Couples, parents, older residents, even teens who normally kept to themselves. They filled the rows without murmuring. Not a single person scrolled their phone. I stood at the front, held the clicker in one hand, and looked out over the room. Then I saw her. Merrily. She stood in the back near the exit, arms folded, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. Karen was nowhere in sight. She didn't speak. She just watched. I began. First, I showed the canopy, the tier, the pellet. I explained the angle, the speed, the depth of penetration. I laid out what would have happened if the pellet had entered soft tissue. Then I showed the deleted report logs, the timestamps, the risk grid. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't dramatize. I just let the truth speak, frame by frame, line by line. When I reached the part about the insurance letters, the room tensed. A few people glanced at each other. One man in the second row closed his eyes and shook his head like he already knew, but had been trying not to admit it. And then I showed them the note I'd received, the threat. "You're not helping anyone." I left it there on screen for a full 10 seconds. No one spoke. Then I clicked again, revealing a slide that simply read, "What happens next? Audit findings, community vote, board action." I stepped back from the podium. "I'm not asking for pity," I said. "I'm not asking for a mob. I'm asking for accountability, for every resident, every child, every visitor who trusted this place to be safe." Halton stood up from the third row. He faced the crowd, voice calm but clear. "As HOA treasurer, I've reviewed every line of our policy. If we fail to act now, we may lose liability coverage entirely, not higher premiums. None." Delia followed. She didn't need notes. "If this happened in a business," she said, "Merrily would be removed immediately under risk conflict statutes. We owe ourselves no less." Still, Merrily didn't speak. She turned, opened the door, and walked out without a sound. But it didn't matter, because she didn't own the vote anymore. We did. The vote was scheduled for Wednesday. Emergency session, Article 4, subsection G of the bylaws. Board members may be removed by special majority vote if they present ongoing liability risk to the community. No lawyers speak, no loopholes, just plain language built for the very scenario Merrily had created. The days leading up to it were colder, quieter. Nobody made small talk in driveways. Nobody waved on dog walks. The neighborhood had shifted into a low, simmering alert, waiting for something to give. Flags weren't flying, lawns weren't mowed. Even the bird feeders hung still, untouched, like everyone had collectively paused until the reckoning was done. Merrily didn't post on the board in those 3 days. No messages, no emergency clarifications, no denial statements, just silence, which was louder than anything she'd ever said. On the night of the vote, I left Linnea with Delia. She insisted, said I needed to go in alone and unencumbered, not as a father with a stroller, as a neighbor with a case. I arrived early and sat in the second row, not in the back, not standing along the wall. I wanted her to see me when she walked in, and she did. Merrily entered through the side door, clutching a thin white folder and wearing that same pressed ivory blouse she always wore when she needed to look untouchable. She didn't look at me. She sat down, opened the folder, and spread the documents neatly in front of her. But this time, no one leaned in to hear her speak. No one offered polite nods. Even the other board members left an empty seat between them and her. Halton stood. He walked to the center and addressed the room with a clarity that cut through every whisper of denial still left in the air. "This isn't about bad parenting," he said. "It's about misused authority, about silenced complaints, about a pattern that left us exposed not just legally, but morally." He pointed to the projector screen behind him. "I've reviewed every one of the redacted reports. 5 of them involved children, 3 involved confirmed property damage, 2 included physical injury. All were dismissed by the president without board vote." Merrily didn't move. "And 1 involved a baby, a 3-month-old, targeted with a BB gun. The only reason we're not discussing a funeral right now is because Bram Callister happened to be trained in tactical response and ballistics." The word funeral sucked the oxygen out of the room. I felt it. So did everyone else. Halton's voice didn't rise. He didn't need it to. The stillness was already screaming. He took his seat. Then came the vote. Each resident had a card, green for remove, red for retain. No anonymity, no secret ballots, just visible, undeniable choice. One by one, the cards lifted. Green, green, green. Another, another. I counted 20 before I even looked back at Marilee. She was frozen, hands folded, jaw clenched so tightly the muscle at her temple twitched. 30, 41, 45, only 2 red cards, both from residents who never even made eye contact. The tally was announced, 45 in favor of removal, 2 against. Marilee was officially removed as HOA president, effective immediately. There was no applause, just relief. She stood slowly, gathered her folder, and without a word, walked out of the room. The door didn't slam. It clicked shut like an ending that had already decided itself days ago. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. This wasn't about vengeance. It wasn't about watching her fall. It was about making sure Linnea never had to grow up in a place where silence was mistaken for peace. I stood, nodded once to Halton, and left. The sky was clear for the first time in days. The trees swayed gently above the clubhouse, no longer whispering warning, and for the first time since the pellet hit that canopy, I finally breathed. The notice went out the next morning. Marilee Draston has been formally removed as HOA Board President under Section 4IG. The interim board will assume responsibilities until a special election is held. All previous citations issued under her sole authority are suspended pending review. It was signed by the secretary, not Halton, not me, neutral, clean, almost sterile. But it didn't feel sterile in the neighborhood. By noon, the sidewalks were busy again. Neighbors who hadn't made eye contact in weeks now waved with cautious relief. Kids returned to the park in pairs. Even the gardener, who used to turn his back when I passed, gave me a tight, wordless nod as he trimmed a hedge near the east fence. Marilee's house was quiet. The blinds remained closed. Her car hadn't moved from the driveway. Karen was nowhere to be seen. It was as if they'd both been folded into the curtains. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Because the insurance rep finally arrived. Her name was Marcia Ree. Thin, no nonsense, clipboard in hand, boots meant for walking through lawsuits. She parked in front of the community center and stepped out like she'd been waiting 3 weeks to do it. I met her at the clubhouse steps. Halton joined me a minute later, clutching a folder of printed reports like it weighed twice its actual mass. Marcia nodded politely. Let's be clear, I'm not here to punish anyone. I'm here to make sure this place still qualifies for a policy. She sat at the front table like a judge, notepad open, voice recorder placed between us. We gave her everything, the deleted complaints, the footage reconstructions, the archive messages showing board collusion. Delia even stopped by mid-meeting to hand over a printed timeline showing incident clustering around the Draston property, cross-referenced with suppressed reports. Marcia didn't flinch. She just took notes. Her pen never stopped moving. Did you file any reports with local law enforcement at the time of the BB incident? She asked me. I did. It was logged. No arrest, no injury, no available footage, no action taken. And did the board escalate the complaint or issue any safety advisory to residents? I shook my head. They issued me a citation for distress behavior. Marcia's eyes didn't even blink. She just underlined something on her pad. And the community's response to these findings? Halton spoke up. 45 votes for removal, 2 against. The result was public and final. She finished writing and finally looked up. Then you may have saved your coverage. She stood and packed her clipboard. This wasn't just negligence, it was pattern and concealment. That's when we pull policies. But you handled it, as a community. That matters to us. She left us with one final note. If she tries to retaliate using HOA channels, contact my office directly. That's not just internal corruption, that's exposure. Then she walked out, boots clicking across the tile like punctuation. We stood there for a long moment, silent. Then Halton spoke. We still have to elect someone new. I nodded slowly. Yeah, but not today. Later that evening, I took Linnea back to the Sundial Grove. The bench had been cleaned recently. Someone had oiled the wood. The scratch from the old canopy hook was still there, but it felt smaller now, like a scar that had started to fade. Linnea stared up at the tree canopy, eyes blinking with that strange wonder babies have when the wind rustles the leaves just right. Her fingers curled around the edge of her blanket, Mira's blanket, and I remembered the promise I whispered into her incubator, weeks before she came home, that I would keep her safe, that I would build her a home where no one had to dodge blame, deflect truth, or weaponize silence, not under the cover of rules, not behind the false smile of neighborhood peace. And I had. Not through rage, not through war, but through something louder than both. The election came 2 weeks later. Not for me. I didn't run. I didn't want to. Halton nominated Delia, and she won by a landslide. 49 votes to 1 abstention. No one voted against her, not a single person. She stepped into the role like she'd been preparing for it in silence all along. No grand speeches, no promises she couldn't back. Just one sentence at the first meeting. This board exists to protect the people who live here, not the people who hide behind it. That was the first time I heard clapping at a Silverbriar Hollow meeting. The reforms came fast. Complaint visibility protocols, incident tracking with third-party timestamp validation, conflict of interest bylaws strengthened, and most importantly, no more solo decision power for any board member. Everything required a majority now, even the color of the dog waste bins. As for Marilee, she moved out 10 days after the vote. No farewell, no apology, no last-minute PR cleanup. One morning, a rental truck pulled into her driveway. By noon, she was gone. Some said she moved in with her sister. Others claimed she filed a lawsuit, but it vanished before any summons reached anyone's mailbox. Most didn't care. Her absence became its own kind of peace. The canopy from Linnea's old stroller is framed now, hanging above my desk in the office. Not because I want to remember the moment we almost lost everything, but because I want to remember why we didn't. That tear, jagged, dark, perfectly round, isn't a wound anymore. It's a warning, a reminder of what happens when silence is enforced by threat, when power goes unchecked because people are too polite to say no. It's why I still walk Linnea to the Sundial Grove every morning, why I nod to the neighbors who used to look away, why I still carry the risk report on my phone, just in case someone forgets how fast things can unravel. Because safety isn't a gate code. It's not a trimmed lawn or a polite newsletter. It's what we protect when no one else is watching. Linnea's almost 6 months old now. She babbles when the wind stirs the leaves. She kicks when the stroller bumps over the sidewalk cracks. She laughs when I whistle the same song Mira used to sing into her belly. The community still isn't perfect. It never will be. But it's watching now, listening, learning. Sometimes I pass the neighbors who once stayed silent, and they stop. They ask how Linnea's doing. They ask if I've seen the new proposal about the park fence. They ask if I think we're doing enough, and I tell them the truth. We are now. If this story hit you in the gut, if you've ever felt powerless in the face of someone hiding behind rules, subscribe now. Not for drama, but for the roadmap. Because one day, it won't be a BB gun or a backyard fence or a playground argument. It'll be something bigger, and when it is, you'll remember this. You don't need a badge to protect your family. You just need the truth and the spine to show it.